Hello. Today I'm going to summarize how we should be doing WordPress development at Secret Source. Although this is directed primarily at WordPress, many of the things that I'll be talking about are not specific to WordPress. They're just sort of general development practices that you should be following when working or when working on projects. As far as WordPress goes here, the first thing you should know is that anytime you start, you have to do a WordPress installation. Anytime you're going to do a new project that requires installing WordPress, you should be starting with what we call WordPress default. WordPress default is a repository that we've set up. You can see it right here. It's called simply WordPress default. It's basically a composer package. And if you don't know what Composer is, I'll show you in a minute, that allows us to quickly create a WordPress installation that's been tuned for development in general, and with Secret Source in particular. The first thing you need to know is that you will not be cloning this repository, you are simply downloading it. So all you need to do is go here to Downloads, and you can just click on Download Repository, just like that. And you can see here that it's been downloaded, right? So at this point, I will open this up. I'll put it into a folder that I have set up for doing development. And I will open it up, uncompress it, and I've already got a name in mind for this. I'm going to say WordPress plugin. Okay, that's going to be the folder name. Once I've done that, I can delete this, the downloaded zip file. I don't need that anymore. So let's take a look at what's inside here. Inside here, you don't have very much. You have a get ignore, that's important. You have two composer files. I'll explain what those are in a minute. You have index.php. You have a README. You have responsive tests. These are Selenium tests that you can use to see if your site is behaving or your work is responsive. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then you have a wp-config sample. And the reason the sample is important is that it includes a few constants that you can set to make your life much easier when doing WordPress development. Now again, this isn't a repository yet. It's just a repository that we've downloaded. So we can just delete things and get things organized as we want. For this particular demonstration, I'm not going to be you don't need the README. I'm going to toss that. You don't need the responsive tests, although you need to understand that when you're doing development, you need to know where you're going before you get there. You need to be thinking about when you're writing code, is this code producing output that I want? Or is it really, am I really going in the right direction with it? And one of the best ways to do that is by having an automated test that you can easily run to check and see if you're getting the results that you want. The responsive tests, these are just, it's Selenium. I'll let you look that up later, and we'll talk about that in a different video. I'm not going to use them for this particular demonstration, so I'm going to toss them as well. Right, so that leaves us basically with get-ignore, composer.json, composer.lock, index, and the wp-config sample. Let's take a look at index. As you can see, this is a sort of slightly customized index file for WordPress. And you'll see why we need this in just a minute. So let's close this up for now. And then wp-config sample, well, like I said, that's just a sample. We'll be using that shortly. But for now, let's just get to the actual WordPress installation. I know you're thinking, come on, that's not a WordPress installation, that's just a few files. We need the actual WordPress installation. So let's come back here to our shell, okay? And you'll see that we've already got, if we cd into wp plugin, okay, at this point we could run Composer, but actually let me switch tabs here. I'm going to, I use Homestead for doing development. Homestead is a virtual machine that's created, or curated, I should say, by the people who do to create Laravel. It's a virtual machine that runs Nginx and PHP 7 and makes your life incredibly easy when it comes to setting up new projects. So I've already got my virtual machine configured. I'm not going to talk about that right now. And I'm going to go SSH into it. So I have a setup here. SSH. Okay. And I've already got a special folder set up as well. Oops, actually I don't. Odd. There we go. Yeah, hang on, I have to reboot the machine. Instead, reboot, does that work? No. Instead, halt-r, right? Reload. That's good enough. Oops. Fascinating to watch, isn't it? All right, so once it's back up and running, you'll see that I have the demo folder set up and ready to work. There we go. Now, why am I using Homestead instead of Vagrant? Well, because I've set up a simple command in my bash.profile on my computer that allows me to type Homestead instead of Vagrant and know specifically which version, which installation of Vagrant I'm referring to. So you can see here that I have the WP plugin folder in there, so I'm going to CD into that. There we go. And now we're going to keep moving along. Show you what's in here. It's the same thing. You see the folders and the files are all the same. Now, one thing I noticed right here, right off the bat, is that let's do a little bit of cleanup. All of these files, for some reason, are 755. They don't need to be executable, and they shouldn't be executable. I suspect that somebody, whoever worked on this last, didn't realize they had their files set to executable. So we're going to change the permissions on that. Basically, so let's just do that. And we're good to go now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install WordPress. To do that, composer install. Okay. I already have Composer installed, and if you want, we can watch as it's creating folders here in the Finder. You'll see the first thing it did is it created two folders, one called Vendor and one called WP. Now it just created the WP content. I'll go through what these folders are in a second. It doesn't take very long to do. What it's doing essentially is pulling repositories, plugins, as you can see, from a website that's designed to even have WordPress Basic in here. That's designed to, it's a mirror of the WordPress plugin and theme repository, but it's set up to work with Composer so that you can do this sort of thing with a single command. You can basically install all kinds of plugins. Now, what's happened here is there's a slight misconfiguration in this version of WordPress default. you don't really need the composer.lock file. And by doing so, I accidentally pulled in a theme called WordPress Basic. I actually don't want that theme right now, so I'm not going to be using it. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to composer. Let's see, actually I have to check and make sure if it's been removed from here. See, it's still in. Yeah, let's see, we have it right here. So I'm going to take this out, right, and scroll down here and remove it from. See, I've already removed it from here, I think. Let's see it here. Right. Sorry about this. This is just a little bit of cleanup. I don't do this all the time, so once you've done something like that, you have to come back here into Composer and do update. And it ought to delete WordPress default, among other things. It's probably also going to update a whole bunch of packages and plugins for the most recent versions. That's actually a good thing. It's probably also going to update the version of WordPress that we've installed, because I'll bet you that we installed a slightly older version. Let's see here. WordPress core installer, but it doesn't tell me which version. There we go, 4.7.2. WordPress is currently at version 4.8.3, and very soon we're going to be doing version 4.9. It's in beta 4 as I record this. Or actually, I think it's release Canada 1 already. Right. So you can see 6 install, 34 updates, and 4 removals. Don't worry about these things, say deleted and that sort of thing. What this comes down to is simply that the last person to work on the repository, which is probably me, forgot to update the composer.lock file, this file right here. The reason this file is important is if you ever lose the JSON.file and you still have the .lock file, that's all you really need to do the installation. It will be able to recreate from the JSON.composer file all of the things that you need. Furthermore, this is the file that sort of tells us what version of different plugins, themes, and such we're actually choosing to use. Right, I'm just checking to see, see it deleted WordPress Basic. That's what I wanted, because I didn't want to use WordPress Basic. All right, so now we're actually ready to go. And here we're left with the following. We have the files we started with. We have a vendor file, I'll go into that in a minute, a WordPress file, a WordPress folder, go into that, and WP content. Now everybody should know that WP content is where you store themes and plugins. See that? So here are the themes. These are just a few themes that I found that are helpful during development for a variety of reasons. And here are the plugins. Now, as you can see, there are quite a few of them. Hang on. Let's go all the way down so you can see it all the way on the bottom, right? Quite a few. You don't really need all of these plugins. The idea of installing all of them is that it simplifies development. You know, not all of them are used for development. For example, Akismet, that's not really used for development at all. That shouldn't even be in there necessarily for development. Other ones like Contact Form 7 are also primarily for production. But these debug bar, for example, those are all very important. The developer plugin is also very helpful when developing plugins. And there are a number of others in here. Okay? So, 2 questions come to mind. What is WP and what is vendor? WP is the actual WordPress installation. You can see it here. This is the standard sort of installation that we're used to seeing with the files in the root directory, WP admin, WP content, and WP includes. It's important for you to understand that this WP content is not used, right? So don't expect to find any themes or plugins in here, although as you can see there are themes in there. This is not used in our installation. I could write a script as part of our package, our composer.install that would delete that folder, and maybe I will sometime, or maybe one of you will kindly do it for me. But for now, that's all there is to it. You don't need to do anything else or worry about it at this point. If you go into Vendor, Vendor is a very peculiar and interesting folder. This is, I don't know the history of Composer, but basically it's what's called a package manager. It allows you to create a package, and a package is essentially just a set of files that you can put a version number on, so that if you want to ship it to somebody else, you can really just put into your composer.json file a reference to the repository, and if it's in one of the if it's in a place that's available for Composer to reach, say Bitbucket in a public repository, it can be downloaded and installed and included. And in the vendor folder, vendor, by the way, this folder, the folder name goes way, way back, and I'm talking 25 to 30 years at least, when concurrent versioning systems there was only one. Basically, the idea was you wanted to include code that came from somebody else, a library of sorts, that you didn't want to have. You didn't want it to be a part of your project because you don't own the code, but you want to use the library. So the vendor folder was excluded from many repositories, or just it was just managed and controlled differently. As you can see in ours, we don't have very much at present. We have a composer folder, which includes auto load, all these auto loaders. We'll talk about that some other day. And then this is the actual WordPress core installer. Guess what's inside source? Ta-da! They're installer files. All right. So for now, you don't need to worry about vendor. Just leave it there. And you don't need to worry about WP. Just leave it there. And we will be working on WP content, but for now, let's update WP config file, and I'm going to cheat here for 1 second. So bear with me. We're going to, at this point, we're going to grab the connection details for, there it is, it's homestead and secret. All right. So we're going to open up WP config. Okay. We're going to say the database name is going to be WP plugin. Oops, got an extra P in there, don't I? That's not going to work. Homestead, it's a database, and secret is the password. That's already set. Now remember, I renamed this WP config from WP config sample. Now, in theory, this off key, secure key, and all this stuff needs to be regenerated. And the fact is, that's really quite simple, so there's no reason not to do it and make your site secure. Just go back here, type that URL in there, and we do Control-All, and come back here, there we go, paste. There you go, right? Easy enough. Now you have a nice secure site. We're going to use a table prefix. We'll call this WP. And then here's where the magic begins to happen, okay? Now, on this particular, on just about all of my sites, I set these constants, WP debug to true, debug log to true, debug display to false, and then this one here is actually a bit controversial. What it does is it disables the editor from within WordPress. You know how sometimes in WordPress there's an option to edit CSS or even function theme and plugin files. Well, I like to disable that because 99% of our customers will never want to do that, and allowing them to do that is just a potential problem. And here's a couple of others that people have mixed feelings about and aren't 100%, you know, nice, but I think they're important to use. The idea is you have two constants to help you determine where what your website is and where the WordPress files are installed. On this, using Homestead, I actually was able to set up a domain called wp-plugin.dev. So I say wp-plugin.dev. That's going to be the URL. You'll notice that I do not include the following slash. I leave that off. And at this point, I don't have to do anything else. That's as far as I need to go. Everything else, the following constants, are all already set up. Okay, we don't have to do anything else. So I suppose I could. Actually, I should probably put these down here like this. Stop editing. Save that. Right. Okay. So at this point, if I go to wp-plugin.dev, what do you think is going to happen? I get a warning that my connection is not private. That's fine because I'm working, it's a self-signed certificate. So I just click on Advanced, Proceed. And I get the WordPress installer. Fabulous. I'm going to do this in English. I'm going to set this as WP plugin sample. The username, always use the same. We're going to hide my super insecure password that I use for development. I use my standard email address. And don't worry about that. Sorry, Richard. Okay, great. So I'm going to log in. And I'm in. I'm going to dismiss this. And it says here, I log in and I've already got an update. What do you suppose that is about? I just have to take a look. Oh, it says, I can see right there, WordPress 8.3 is available. Which version of WordPress am I using right now? Right, we'll come back to this in a minute. But if I go to the front page, you can see there it is. 2017, no content per se, and just the information, right? So that in a nutshell is how we set up a WordPress site from scratch at secret source. When you need a WordPress installation, a new one, this is the way you should be doing it. You should not be copying or downloading the files from wordpress.org. Nor using Scriptaculous to install it on the server. You should be doing it this way. And let's talk about why. Why is it important? Well, the first thing you need to do is, anytime you're working on something, on any of our projects, you need to start with a plan. You need to think ahead of time about what you're going to do. What steps are you going to take? You know, if Richard or any of us come to you and say, I need you to do this, or I want you to work on this project and do these tasks, before you sit down and start actually coding, think, put some time into what are you going to do first and why. Okay? Thinking about things, about developing, making a development plan is very important. Just going in and starting coding is always going to be a waste of time, guaranteed. I can't stress that enough. To give you an example so that you can follow along, we've got this plugin that we're working on, and one of the things that we're going to be doing, one of the things that we're going to need to do, is to verify that the featured image for a site is not set in the Yoast settings, but rather as the featured image for the home page. Now the reason for this is that LinkedIn will sometimes have issues if you've set the featured image in Yoast and not in the actual page's featured image option. I have no idea why this is. It's really annoying. It's one of those stupid things that you just shake your head at and say, you know what, is this really worth it? But the answer is yes, it is. So the way to do this is to not set it in Yoast. So for this other project that we're working on, we've got this test. It's going to test and see, did the developer use Yoast to set the featured image, or did they use the actual featured image in WordPress? Yes, I know what you're thinking. That's dumb. Why don't you just tell everybody to set the featured image rather than writing a plugin that's going to test that? And the answer is, we do tell everybody to use the featured image, and yet we still find that periodically, once in a while, somebody sets it in Yoast and not in the page. So we have to do this, right? So this is the task, right, that I have to do. And I need to think about how I'm going to go about solving this problem. How am I going to do this? I'm not going to do this as a plugin in this video because that takes just a little too much time. It's more involved. But I'm going to do it as a theme modification. So number one, I'll be working in functions.php. Right? So this is going to be my plan. I'm not going to set numbers yet. We'll be modify, put code in functions.php. Right? That's the first thing. Now, okay, fine. How do I know, all right, how am I going to know if how am I going to figure out whether or not it's been set in Yoast or not? I mean, how do I know? Is there some magic function that I can call that will say, yes, it's been set in Yoast, or am I going to have to write that function? How do I know what setting inside Yoast is being updated? What if the setting is actually already, what if it is already part of the image, part of the page rather, the featured image for the page, and it's in Yoast? Is that a problem if they're both there? I'm going to say yes, it is, by the way. Right? So these are some of the questions that I'm asking ahead of time before sitting down and working, so that I can plan my time. Right? So the first thing I need to do really is to figure out what setting, what is being changed in Yoast that when the featured image is being set. How do we learn these things? How do we find these things out? Well, there's a lot of ways you could do this. You could go to the Yoast website. I'm sure they have a developer section. They probably have documentation. And there's probably a filter or a hook, an action hook, that maybe, there's probably a filter that you might be able to tap into to determine or when the featured image gets updated. But that doesn't necessarily tell you if the feature image has already been updated. What you need to know, you need to be able to somehow query the Yoast file settings and such and figure it out, and say, has this been set? Right. So I need to know what setting is being changed. My favorite way to do this is figure out what setting in Yoast is changed when featured image is set. Right. I'll talk about how I'm going to do that in a minute. Okay, so let's say I figured it out. Now I know which setting it is. So then I have to write some code that will query that setting, and if it's been set, display an error essentially, or show a warning. So then in functions PHP, I'm going to query setting 3 if set return an error. Okay, or an error / warning. Lots of ways to do that too. And if not, let's see. What was the description of the task? verify the featured image is not set in the Yoast settings. Okay, so it doesn't say make sure that the featured image is set, does it? Setting the featured image in the Yoast we need to verify that the featured image is not set in Yoast settings, but only in the page's featured image setting. So I suppose in reality this has to do two checks. One, it has to check that it's not in Yoast, and the other is that it is set for the there is a featured image set. Right, so if set, return an error / warning for check if featured image set for home page. Oops. Fine. If not set, return an error / warning. All right. So these are the things that. Great. I think this is enough. That pretty much covers it. And these are the steps that I'm going to follow. Oops, sorry. Let's put this in. I'll put this in here. We'll call this notes. I like notes files, right? Okay. Notice I still haven't created the repository yet. And I'll get to that in a second. Right. So this is my plan. Okay. So let's just let this sit for a minute. And here's another important thing. I mean, it sounds almost counterintuitive, but the fact is, once you make your plan, it's often a good idea to get up, go and have a coffee, away from your desk, maybe draw some pictures, talk to somebody else. Try not to talk too much about code, and just sort of go away from it. And the reason is that once you make your plan, a lot of times when you're in the middle of it, you're not thinking about the big picture or things that could happen that could ultimately be a problem. But I find that if you go away for a while, for 15, even as little as 15 minutes, when you come back to your plan and you review it, sometimes you see things that could be a problem or that you didn't really think about and you need to sort of flesh out a little bit better. Right. So at this point, let's go to, I can tell you right off the bat, I can just see right now, one thing that we haven't really talked about is, what does this mean? Return an error, warning. What are we talking about? That's going to need a little bit more, we're going to have to provide a little more detail. But we should think about what exactly we're doing here. What are we talking about here, right? I'll come back to this. Before I go any further, I do want to mention the gitignore file in here. Because this will be a repository, we definitely want to keep track of, we want to keep some things, but not everything, right? In this particular case, as I said, this will be a theme modification, okay? So in themes, I'm going to create a new child theme, 2017 child, because that's quite frankly the easiest. So we'll call this theme, we can call it whatever we want, right? Often people will say 2017-child to help you understand that it's a child of 2017. So let's just do that actually. But you can call it anything you want, to be honest. Child 2017. Like Bugs Bunny. Okay. And let's grab the functions, index, and style, and we'll copy those in here into the child. Okay. Let me just do this real quick. Keep it simple. I'm basically clearing these things out. We'll leave the index page as it is. You probably don't even need the index page, but I tend to bring it in just so I can test things out without modifying the parent. We'll delete all of this. And actually, this is a great opportunity to mention this. Google Lighthouse is now complaining when you have a single style sheet and is now asking us to have multiple link elements in the head each one pointing to a style sheet that is specific for a given breakpoint. Whereas in the past we would put our breakpoints right in the style sheet. Now they're saying, no, we want separate style sheets for each breakpoint, and then you use media queries inside the link element itself to determine which files to be bringing in. There are many reasons why. I won't go into them today, but one of the things we need to do is come down here and say template 2017. All right, name we're going to call this. See, I called this plugin. I didn't plan this talk very well, did I? Because in the end, I'm not doing a plugin. I'm just going to do a theme modification. Mr. Stresen-Reuter. I'm not going to worry about updating versions or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just using this to send. All right. So at this point, close it up. We've got, where are we now? Yeah, I'll point out one more thing. All right, we're going to look at git ignore. Okay, so, oops. So git ignore tells Git to ignore some files and to allow others. This is a copy-paste from a site that we found that had a similar configuration to what we were looking for. It's a little bit roundabout the way it works, but the bottom line is this. You go down to the bottom, and where it says track these plugins and themes, add your own entries here, and it shows you some examples. Let's do this now. For example, I want to track. Yeah, see, I don't care about these two, so I'm going to take this one out. And we'll add, we're going to do, oops, themes 2017 child. Okay, now when I work in Git, what's going to happen is Git's going to ignore all of this other stuff. Okay, up here, it's going to ignore all of these things. And it's not going to ignore this particular folder. So what does this mean? Why would I do something like this? What in the world is wrong with me? Why don't I just put it all into a Git repository and be done with it? The answer is I don't want to clutter up my Git repository with massive amounts of files that are versioned elsewhere and that will be updated and changed. I only want the files that I'm responsible for and that I'm going to be working on in my repository. I don't want the WordPress core files in there. I don't want the 2017 core theme files in there. Although if you're working from a premium theme, then you probably do, because you can't use Composer with most premium themes. So you can see that so this is maybe a little bit unusual to our approach, but believe me, it works. And before I come back to the plan, let's just go ahead and let's just do that so you can get a sense of how this works, right? So I'm back in my Mac. I'm not in the virtual machine right now, by the way. I'm just in my Mac here. So I'm going to do git init, right? Git add dot. Actually, I believe it's star. I'm not a big Git person. Following paths are ignorable whenever you git ignore files. Nope. I want to keep ignoring them. Right? You see how that works? Look at that. That was exactly what we wanted. It ignored vendor, WP, and WP config. I definitely want to ignore this one because config files are specific to the machine that they live on. They should not be traveling with the repository. They should not be moved from one machine to the other. They're specific to the machine that they're on. I will say that again and again. And if I do a git status, okay, you can see that what's been included are the composer files, the main index file, and everything that's in my child theme. See that? Git ignore has not been added. I could if I wanted to, but it just doesn't matter at this point. I suppose I should, because that way my files will always, be a part of the repository. What the heck? Let's do it. Git add dot Very good. Git commit -m initial commit. Great. So let's come back to our plan now. So we're going to be working in functions. First step, figure out what we're seeing in Yoast. I remember what I was worried about was this. What does this mean if it said return an error? Well, the idea is that in the plugin version, you'll have a checklist, and tests that fail will have an X by them, a big X, and the reason for the failure. But for this particular thing, I think all we're going to do, the very easiest way is going to be display admin notification that something is wrong. Okay, we're going to do this on every load of the admin. It's going to be a little bit of overkill, but it's also kind of necessary for these demonstration videos, right? We're not going to go into that level of detail. Right, okay. So we've got a plan. We'll start executing it in a minute. Let me just mention a couple more things here. These two things, these are more than just pet peeves for me. When I see our developers working, if I see them, first of all, if I see them working without a plan, that's a problem. I want to see you always have some sort of a plan, however basic, however simple it is. It needs to be thought out. You need to have taken into consideration pretty much everything. So that's number one. Then, don't code in the dark or with blindfolds on. And what that's referring to is when you're programming, a lot of times you're trying to solve a problem, and you found something on Stack Overflow that said, or Stack Exchange or whatever, that says that you should do it this way, and it mentions some bit of code or function or something that you're not terribly familiar with but sounds about right, and you're trying to use it and it's not quite working the way you expect. Something's wrong, and so you change a parameter, and then that still gives you an error and it's not quite right, so you decide to try something else, etc., etc. This is bad programming practice. You need to know what these functions mean and how they work. If you can't understand the documentation, don't try to use the code, because you're only going to be getting, it's just asking for trouble. Make sure you understand what the code is doing, but in detail, like specifically, and that you have some real control over it. I see this a lot also when new developers are trying to set up websites, especially with something like Homestead or on our server. They don't really understand the request response life cycle, and so as such they don't really quite grasp what happens when Apache or Nginx receives a request. What exactly happens on the server? How is that request processed? What is the response? Why are response codes, Apache response codes or HTTP response codes even important? Well, the bottom line is this is all we do. All we do as web developers is HTTP. We're just sending messages and receiving messages. That's all we're doing. You need to understand, you need to have an intimate knowledge of the response codes and the format of a response or a request. What are request headers? What are response headers? What are the most common ones? How do they work? What kind of information are they transmitting? These are all very important things. If you don't know the answers to these things, you need to study, you need to look them up, and you need to learn about them, because you'll be using them every single day. Trial and error, slow programming, that's basically the same as don't code in the dark or with blindfolds on. This isn't magic. This isn't voodoo, this isn't religion, this isn't mythology, this is science. There is a cause and an effect, direct cause, direct effect. and it's not magic. If you don't understand it or it seems like magic, you don't understand it, and you need to figure it out. Okay, and that's where these following items come into play. Read the documentation, check the logs, we'll talk about that soon. Use a virtual environment, I'll show you that in a minute. Use a debugger, and then these are all ways of not programming in the dark, of knowing what you're doing, of going in with your weapons loaded and ready to use them. Okay? So let's talk first about reading the documentation. Well, actually no, we'll come back to this in a minute. First thing we're going to do is figure out what setting in Yoast has changed when the feature image is set. All right? Yes, this is a good one, isn't it? Normally, if I was teaching a class, I would say by show of hands, how many of you think we should read the Yoast website and see if we can figure it out from there? I would imagine that about 10% would raise their hand, and then maybe 15 at the most. And then an alternative would be to fire up the debugger, put a breakpoint at the Yoast plugin, have the picture ready to go and click submit and see if you can figure that out. Good luck with that. So these are the main things, right? But all of these are really like, none of them are pretty. I mean, we could go to Yoast's documentation and stuff and maybe figure it out, but there's actually, believe it or not, there's a potentially simpler way to do this, and it is to do the following. First, in this new site, okay, we're going to enable Yoast. Okay, now because I used WordPress default, one of the plugins that is included automatically is this baby right here. There it is, right? So I don't have to download it, I don't have to install it, I just have to activate it. Okay, and indeed, it's now activated. And sure enough, I got that message from Yoast saying, blah, blah, blah. It needs to be updated, right? Or there are 4 issues or whatever, okay? So great, terrific, fine, activated, blah, 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 blah. We're not going to go into details there. So when I go into my settings, the question is, right now, the front page is currently my latest post, but we never do that. We always use a standard page as the front page. So I'm going to save that change there. Okay. And I'm going to go into pages, all pages, sample page, edit. Okay. Scroll down. Now here's where we are trying to avoid the exact thing that we're trying to get people not to do, right? See if I can remember where this setting is. Yeah, here's one. I guess they may have changed this. It used to be that there was a default image. Right, so sorry about that, but this seems to have changed. So, all right, that's fine. What we'll do is we'll just use, for the demonstration purposes, we'll just use the Facebook setting, right? So here you have a setting, and look at this, they even talk about the size of it. This is almost exactly the same as what they need for Facebook, for LinkedIn. But, so what am I going to do here? How am I going to figure out when I upload this image, right? How am I going to figure out that which setting has changed? How am I going to know which item to query? All right. Well, let's have some fun here. Hang on a second. Bear with me here one moment. Yeah, that's a good one. I just covered. All right. Hang on. Put this in here. And here's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do, you're going to laugh when you see this, but it's really the best way that I figured out how to do this. I have this application called SQL Pro. SQL Pro allows me to connect to MySQL databases inside my Vagrant box. I select the database that I want. I come up here to File, and I select Export. I'm going to export it to my desktop. So exporting everything, structure, everything. Say Export. Okay. Then I come back here. I select File. I select my new file. Okay. And I say Use Image. Now, normally I should set my alt text if I'm a proper developer. Xcode, garbage. Use Image, and click on Update. Actually, you know what? I'm not sure that actually saved. Let me just check. Okay. So now I go back to SQL Pro and I say File, Export, and export it again. And then I use another program called BBEdit that allows me to do a difference comparison between two separate files. So, hang on, just push this out of the way for a minute. So this is the old file, the new file, sorry. This is before above, after below. I do a compare on the database. Now, just so you can see it better, I'm going to see if I can make this window a little bit smaller. Okay. And you can see that I can scroll through line by line, and I can maybe find which value changed between, just by updating that one field. Look at this. This seems to have been updated. Yoast, WPSEO, Open Graph Image. There it is, right? Okay, so I know that, yeah, let's talk about this. I'm in the WPP post meta, all right? And the way this table works is it associates records of information with a single post in the post table down below here, right? So the post that I modified was post number 2, and the value that I'm looking for, the actual specific, I don't know how to put this, the option or the post meta that I'm looking for is called Yoast WPSEO Open Graph Image. Okay? This is important. Here it is. I now know what I'm looking for. All right? This is really, really important. I've now wasted almost no time. I'll go through, though. I'll just have a quick look and see if I can tell sort of specifically what's changed, if anything. Okay, I don't see anything. Oops. Yeah. Yeah. Just go back here. We're in the, look at this, there's a Yoast notifications, Yoast user settings. See, I don't think either of these are related to the actual post or the image. SEO. Yeah, and these are the addition of the Yoast tables, right? Yoast SEO meta. Okay. Internal link count, incoming links. Interesting. But nothing related to the image that I just uploaded. All right, so I'm pretty confident that, I'm going to close that up, that the Yoast setting that we're looking for is called that. All right. Now, there's a lot of additional work that's going to go into figuring out, is the home page using, does it have this set, right? And you know, I don't know this off the top of my head. I'm going to have to think about it, and I'm going to have to read documentation, right? Read the documentation. I'm going to use a virtual environment to help me figure out the best way to go about this. And I might even have to use a debugger, although it's unlikely for this particular task. And along the way, I may also check the logs. So let's just stop for a minute and let's just take a look at that. One of the things, let's open up this folder again so you can see it. In our plugin here, you'll see that there's this file called debug log. That is simply a log file that is created thanks to this right here. I'm sorry, this one right here. Debug log true. Okay. So it has a size of 1 kilobyte, but I don't think there's really anything in it. As I'm developing, I often like to do the following. I just do tail -f debug log, and I just keep that open. Okay. There was some sort of an error, it seems. But I will bet you anything it was unrelated to, it was nothing important, it's just a notice of an undefined offset. Ooh. And it's in, you'll see it's in WordPress. So we're just going to leave tail open here, doing its job. I probably won't need it for this particular task, but it's there. Okay. So we've got this done, right? Query setting. So how are we going to query the setting? Normally in WordPress, in order to get information about a post, there's like 1,000 different ways, right? This sort of the standard way is to set up an actual WP query object where you can set up the query to say, if this post meta exists, or return all the pages that have this post meta, for example. But we don't want to do that. What we want to find is the page that is the home page. We want to find which page is currently set as the front page, essentially. And then when we have that page, find out if it has this particular value, if this is set or not. Okay? Right, so that's kind of a lot. So, like, first step, well, here, let's put it in here, right? So, what is the front page, front/home page, right? I'm going to say home page, right? And I really want the ID, okay, not just the front page. I mean, I want to get to the ID. And then what I want to do is I'm going to do a WP meta query to find out, does ID have Yoast meta image? Okay. And at that point, that's basically it. This is basically all I need to do. Okay. So at this point, then, the easiest thing to do is we want to know which page is the front page. Now, some of you are much better at WordPress than I am, and you know right off, you just know immediately that that there's X function that tells you what the front page is, right? And others of you also know that this is actually more complex than it seems, unfortunately. And finding out exactly which page is on the front page is more complicated than you might think. WordPress ID of home page get WordPress ID of homepage. That looks just perfect. How do I get the post ID of static front page? You see, it's even in Stack Exchange. It's not that easy. This is actually an unbelievably hard thing to do. Right. WordPress has a few useful options. You can get the homepage ID by using the following: front page ID get option, page on front. Ooh, that's new. I didn't know that one. See, I'm telling you, there's 1,000 ways to do this. Or the blog ID by using. Interesting. Interesting. Right. So so this looks like the one that we want, this first one. So I know that most of you are thinking right now, oh, no big deal. Copy and paste that. Here, let's just do this. This is the typical thing that I see and I absolutely detest, and I don't want to see anybody ever doing this because it makes me want to scream. Right. Front page. Hello. Echo front page ID. Right? Standard stuff. Thoroughly. Here, even worse. Okay? Sorry, I just laughed at myself. We'll just do this. Oh, geez, that didn't work, did it? All right, I have to set the theme. Duh. Sorry about that. We want WP plugin. We'll activate this. Oh. Now I got to delete that from here. Okay, hang on. Let's see. Okay, I got to delete it. No, better yet, here, I'll comment this out. That's right, I'll comment this. Now, some of you can tell by the tone of my voice that I'm being silly. You know, this is not the way to do it. This is the way you do it when you don't know what you're doing. The proper way to do this sort of testing of variables and such, is through the use of virtual environments. WordPress has this thing called the debug bar. It's a plugin. Okay, we're going to activate a couple of them. We're going to activate the debug bar and the console. List, script, and style dependency. Yeah, we'll start with those two. Okay. So I've selected them. We'll activate them. Takes a minute to load, but once you've got it, you now have this up here, right? This little menu item up here. It shows you something called the console. Okay. And this is pretty nifty. This is something you wouldn't expect to find. But it's a console, a PHP console that you can, and a SQL console, mind you, where you can execute PHP code in the context of WordPress, of your current installation. So let's take the code that these people suggested. Let's just do this directly. Just take this right here. Okay. And echo. Right? I put my command in there, I put my code in there, and I click run. There's my output. Now, isn't that much more pleasant than this? God, go away. Right. Okay, so now I know that this seems to be, well, we can even go back and test. I mean, we could see this is edit page. Yes, it is post ID 2. So this is not only accurate, this is really the way to do it. So that's fine. We'll save this. We'll set this in a variable. All right, front page. Oh, okay. Maybe I don't want to delete all of it, right? That's fine. Cool. All right, so I've got my front page ID. Where's my plan? What's my next step? Does ID have Yoast meta image? Okay, well that's cool. Let's do that in here too, actually. fpid equals. All right, and then we're going to do another search. We're going to say get pay in post meta. The reason I'm saying post meta Yeah, let's do it outside the loop too. Post meta is because in WordPress everything is a post, even pages. And essentially, see, no, I don't care about display now. Let's take that outside the loop. I don't need that. Get post meta. Fantastic. Really great. This is probably exactly what I'm looking for. Post ID, string key. Well, we know what that's going to be, don't we? Right, so at this point, what's the problem with doing it in functions.php? Who can tell me? Raise your hands. No, Johnny, it's not that. The problem is that when functions.php loads, your plugins most likely haven't loaded yet. And so if you try to execute, and you probably have access to posts, I think, at that point, but you might not have all of the details, and it might be a little bit more troublesome than you think. So again, we're going to come back here. I'm going to copy this, okay? Go back into our console, and I'm going to say echo get post meta fpid, and what's the key? Key was the second one, right? Key. What do you think the Boolean is? Oh, that's if you want an array or whether to return a single value. Return will be an array. Will be a value of metadata field if single is true. So we wanted, yeah, we're going to say true. So key followed by a true. Close it up. And then what's the key, everybody? Everybody? Anybody? The key? Yes, it's this. Right. Okay. Now, if this happens, if this works, so I don't know what to say except hallelujah. Hallelujah. There we go. Right? It exists. Then it's the case. Now, if I delete this, let's say I go back here and I delete this. If I can, I don't even know if I can, to be honest. Knowing, let's see. How many of you think this is going to fail? Just doing what I just did. This is trial and error. This is the kind of thing that I hate. I wish these sorts of things were more obvious. This is a terrible interface. There ought to be some sort of an X or something that I can clear, that I can hit to clear this out. Well, that seemed to have worked. Let's go back in here. We'll rerun this. It should come back an empty string. Bingo. Fabulous. And if you're you know, really anal about it, and you want to be sure that you really get the right thing, put in var dump, and it tells you, yep, string empty, length 0. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. So this is exactly what we want. Take this here. We're going to go back to our functions.php. Right, there's a bit of an issue here. We'll talk about this in a minute. Here's the shorter version of this, I think. Also an issue with coloring. Oh, there we go. We'll call this Yoast featured image. Okay, fantastic. That's good enough. There's an issue here. We'll talk about this in a minute. So query saying, if set return, right, okay. The issue is the following. When functions.php loads, much of WordPress has not fully loaded. There may be many parts that are not ready. So we have to wrap this in an action that will load when, and we only want to show this in the admin, right? So we don't want to show this on the main page of the site. We don't want to tell everybody, hey, we just want to show it in the admin. So the way to do that is going to be via filter or via an action. by the way, these are I've configured my editor with snippets so that I don't have to remember how to write, add filter, for example. Okay, I'll just get the filter name. The reason I'm debating and doubting here is that there is an action or a filter that executes when you load the admin. But because I don't like to work in the dark and I don't like to guess, and although Google is, pretty helpful, there are some other things we can do. You'll notice that the debug bar and the debug plugins include this one called debug bar hook log. Okay, that will tell us a list of all the hooks that are loading and the order in which they're loading inside WordPress. So I'm going to activate this. Now remember, we have all of these plugins because we started with WordPress default. WordPress default will, by default, include all of these developer helpers, and you should use them. All right, so here now I come here to action log, and this isn't, I always make this mistake. This isn't the one that I want. I should remove this, right? There is a hook log. I'm going to deactivate that one. I want the other one. Action hooks, there it is. This one. Okay, now when I come here and I go to actions, I get a very simple list of all of the actions that have executed. Okay, and what I'm looking for is this one right here, actually. Admin notices. What this is, the admin notices hook is, I thought it was a filter hook, but it might be an action hook. Let's see if we can figure out if it's a filter. Plugin in action admin notices hook. Yeah, it's an action, I think. Prints admin screen notices. Right, we really want something that's just prior to this because we need to add the notice prior to them being actually printed. There's an interesting little thing here. Yes, we know how those work under the hood. Yes, blah, blah, blah. Fast dismissed, blah, blah, blah. Do they talk about how to set these? Ah, here we go. Yeah, that's not right. Nope. The other is to add settings errors via the admin notices hook, for example. The admin notices, okay, that's fine. We will use this then. Right, so we're going to come in here, we're going to say add, so that was an action, right? Yeah, so it's not a filter, it's an action. So we'll say action, we'll move, oops, these two, and the filter name is admin notices. Function in, there's nothing going in, it's just, so we're going to leave this blank. And what are they doing? Settings errors. Right, settings errors was alright, well clearly I don't know what this is either. I don't know. Don't know. We'll look at this in a minute. The thing is that this is where you do have to do a little bit of extra research to figure out exactly how to do this. It's not that hard, just I'm on video, so I don't want to have to edit this out. But you might be saying, but Ted, why don't you use your console? And I suppose I could. The problem is that the console, unfortunately, is limited. It doesn't allow you to simulate a page load and view the actions that are being displayed along the way and interact with them. It's just a place where you can try to execute PHP as I did. So for this particular one, I think what we'll try is, let's just try this. So I can't remember how to do this. If Oscar were here, he could tell me exactly what to do. All right, hang on. Let's see, is it this one? Yeah, let's come back here. Nope, wrong one. Sorry about that. Right, so so this apparently, this seems to be a function, but I can't believe it. The message to show. Here we go, here's an example. Yeah, that's what I thought. So this is a peculiar sort of a, way of doing things. Normally in WordPress, normally the way this works is you use filters to introduce HTML or to output HTML. But in this case in particular, I don't know why, we're being asked to use a function, or use an action rather. So in theory, simply adding this, I ought to be seeing a notice in the admin. So if I come back here and I click on all pages, for example, I should be seeing, there it is, done. See that? So it's always going to click here and I'll still see it done, right? All right, so what I'd like to do now at this point is I'm going to create a new hook. All right, let's say add action. I think there's one called admin init. Let's go back here to our list, debug, actions, admin init. Ooh, damn, I'm good. Surprise myself sometimes. I didn't really expect there to be one. Ay, ay, ay. Right. Oops. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to pop all this down inside here, like this. 2, 3, 4. Yes, I use 4 spaces, but I prefer tabs, frankly. But I'm too lazy to configure my editor to use tabs than spaces. I just don't care anymore. Right. Okay, so by the way, you'll see that it goes off the edge of the screen here. Generally speaking, I try to limit code length to this sort of right here, this line 72 lines or something, just because it really is easier to read, even on these high-resolution screens, if you aren't reading very far from left to right. But in this case, I don't care. So let's do this. If only blank not equals Yoast featured image, we're going to add this action. Okay. This is kind of a bizarre approach because we're now embedding an action in another one, but you can do it. And honestly, there might be other better ways to go about it, but this is going to happen. Instead of the message is going to be hey dummy. Yeah, we'll even go with a capital D. Hey dummy, you used Yoast. Do not use Yoast to set featured image. Period. Right. And our text domain will be whatever it is. And instead of saying no to success, we're going to say error. Okay. So at this point, right? At this point, I ought to be able to, let's go back to the pages, we're going to add a page. And you'll see that the error doesn't come up, does it? It doesn't come up, it works fine. Okay, so, and if I come down here and I reset this to, come on, there we go, to this, okay, update, you should see the error now if I've done this properly. Bingo. Okay, and this will continue to show regardless of what page I'm on until we go back and fix it. And sure enough, it's gone. All right, so that basically, that's it. Let's go back to our notes. Let's see where we are. Okay, if set, return an error, a warning, display admin notification, something is wrong. Perfect. Check if featured image is set for the home page. Well, frankly, I'm not going to do that because I'm tired and this has gone on much, much longer than I had intended. But you get the idea. Okay? This is how we should be working. And you see how in a very short amount of time I was able to, and really only knowing one action and depending heavily, relying very heavily on these plugins, I've been able to, the actions list in the console, I've been able to whip out very quickly a very clean and properly done solution, following WordPress best practices. It's code that anybody can read. It makes perfect sense. This isn't ideal, this embedding an action inside of another action, but sometimes there's just no other way to do it. And let me just check my notes and see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. Checking the logs. Ooh, remember, I left the log running in the background. Let's take a look and see what's up with that. Nothing, no errors. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, we did have a syntax error. But that seems to have been resolved. Because if you look now, line 3, there's no syntax error there. It's properly done. Okay. Let's see. Back to notes. Yeah, so we didn't use the debugger, but we could. But there's no need for it for this particular one. Check the logs, use a debugger. All right, well, I think that's enough for today. We'll do a debugger in another day. We'll talk about deploying directly from Git. But that does bring up a good question. Git, hang on, cd plugins, no, themes, right? 2017 child, Git status. Okay, so functions has been modified, and I could go through and I could commit it and everything if I really cared about saving it, but I don't. Right, so I think that's it. We'll talk about these two some other day. I hope that you've enjoyed, I hope you've learned, and please use this information. Play around with all these different debug things. Install the developer. These are WordPress. This one is created by Automatic. These are the people who create WordPress. This is a plugin designed to help you develop. Okay, I have things for duplicating posts in here. We have, what are some other things we've got in here? Ooh, this one. This is a PHP, Knit is a modern and powerful PHP debugging helper, which requires zero setup and replaces var, dump, and printar, and debug backtrace. This plugin is a wrapper for Kint, sorry. Monster widget. Some of these other ones are like sample content to help you, create the worst case scenario of people uploading massive images or putting in text that just doesn't make sense in the context that it's being used in, that sort of thing. Right, show IDs, that one's pretty important. Stream Syncy, this one's fantastic. This is a powerful IDE for plugin editor, themes editor, text widgets. Well, I've disabled these too, by the way. But the text widgets might be helpful. Theme check is another sort of plugin for testing that your theme is coded properly. Transients manager, that's also quite helpful. If you don't know what transients are, you ought to learn. Look up, they're like temporary cache. WP control lets you control what's happening in the WP cron system. REST API, actually this one we don't need anymore. This one I can remove. That's now incorporated in WordPress by default. Right, so you get the idea. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you've learned a ton. And go get them.